The most terrifying Fermi paradox solution nobody wants to be true. Many scientists who have spent decades studying this mystery already understand where that path leads. A few are willing to say it openly. Most choose not to. Not because the conclusion falls apart, but because of what accepting it would say about us. It says something very real about humanity. It says something about this exact point in history and the place our civilization now occupies. There are roughly 30 serious explanations for why the cosmos appears so quiet. We'll examine every one of them. We'll begin with the ideas that are easiest to accept, move on to the explanations that become harder to argue against, and finally reach the possibilities that many people stop thinking about before they reach the end. After every option has been weighed, only one remains. It is the explanation almost nobody hopes is correct. Before that answer can make sense, the original question has to be understood. Not the romantic version people like to repeat, but the real one. The question first raised by a physicist named Enrico Fermi during a simple lunch in 1950, a question that refused to leave his mind. Los Alamos, during the summer of 1950, a handful of physicists were eating lunch together. Someone mentioned the recent stories about flying saucers. The newspapers had been filled with them all week, and the conversation naturally drifted in that direction. Enrico Fermi listened without saying much. Then, somewhere in the middle of lunch and ordinary conversation, he quietly asked, "But where is everybody?" The others laughed at first. Then they paused. Then the room became strangely silent, because the question seems almost too easy. It sounds like the kind of thing a child might ask before learning anything about the stars. But the moment you stay with it, the moment you place mathematics beside that simple sentence, it changes into a question that refuses to let go of your mind. So let's begin with the numbers. In 1961, an astronomer named Frank Drake was working at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in Green Bank, West Virginia, where he created what became known as the Drake equation. It marked the first serious scientific effort to estimate how many civilizations capable of communication could exist in our galaxy at this very moment. The equation combines a series of probabilities: the rate at which stars are born, the percentage of those stars that have planets, the percentage of those planets where life begins, where intelligent life evolves, where technology develops, and where civilizations are still sending signals today. When Drake first put the equation together, many of those values were nothing more than educated guesses. No one knew how frequently planets formed around stars. No one knew how often environments suitable for life actually existed. Most of the calculation relied on very limited knowledge. That situation has changed. Between 2009 and 2018, the Kepler Space Telescope confirmed the existence of more than 4,000 exoplanets. Its discoveries completely changed our understanding. Planets are not unusual. They are incredibly common. Almost every star appears to have planets. The fraction of stars with planetary systems turned out to be very close to 1. Rocky worlds located within the habitable zone are not everywhere, but they are certainly not extraordinarily rare either. When today's observations are inserted into Drake's equation, even while using conservative estimates for the biological and social factors that remain uncertain, the result still suggests somewhere between thousands and millions of civilizations may exist in the Milky Way alone right now, potentially transmitting signals and potentially detectable. And that is only one galaxy. Beyond it lie another 2 trillion galaxies. According to the mathematics, the universe should not be quiet. It should be filled with transmissions, technological fingerprints, enormous engineering projects, and other evidence of advanced civilizations that would be difficult to overlook. At the very least, we should have stumbled across something by chance, a random transmission, an unusual pattern hidden in background noise. anything. Then, in 1977, a researcher named Jerry Eman was examining observations collected by the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University. He was reading through a printed computer record. This was 1977, when data existed as long sheets of paper covered with columns of numbers representing signal strength. During that review, he noticed something extraordinary. A narrowband signal at 1,420 megahertz is the hydrogen line, exactly the frequency many physicists had predicted an intelligent civilization might choose for communication. The signal remained detectable for 72 seconds, the entire period the telescope could observe that location in the sky. Its strength stood so far above the normal background that Emmons circled it on the printout and wrote a single word in the margin. That happened on the 15th of August 1977. Ever since then, astronomers have searched for the same signal again. After 47 years of follow-up observations, using multiple telescopes, examining multiple frequencies, and revisiting the same region of space hundreds of times, the signal has never appeared again. That is where things stand today. One unexplained event after 65 years of listening, one signal that appeared once and then disappeared forever. Yet the calculations tell us the sky should contain countless examples like it. Fermi's question was never truly about flying saucers. It was about a contradiction sitting at the heart of everything we believe we understand about the universe. The equations point in one direction. The observations point somewhere completely different. That gap, that persistent 5-year-old difference between what the numbers predict and what we actually observe, is exactly what every explanation we are about to examine attempts to resolve. Some explanations handle it gracefully. Others solve one mystery only by creating even bigger ones. And one explanation, the one that remains after every alternative has been considered, resolves the contradiction in a way that is deeply uncomfortable. But that comes later. The first possibility is much easier to accept. Perhaps we simply have not searched enough. Maybe the signals really are out there, and we just are not prepared to receive them yet. It is the most reassuring explanation, the one that allows people to sleep peacefully. Maybe the transmissions already exist. Maybe we have been searching in the wrong part of the sky, listening at the wrong frequencies, or using instruments that are not capable enough. It would be like trying to tune into a radio station by knocking on the walls instead of using a receiver. It is a perfectly reasonable question to ask. So let's examine what humanity has actually done. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has existed in different forms ever since Frank Drake aimed a radio telescope at 2 nearby stars in 1960. The project was called Project Ozma. For 2 months he listened. Nothing was detected, but that was only the beginning. During the decades that followed, the effort grew much larger. Project Meter at Harvard, directed by Paul Horowitz, monitored 8.4 million frequency channels at the same time throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Project Serendip at UC Berkeley has operated continuously since 1979 as a passive observing system connected to major radio telescopes. It does not receive dedicated telescope time at all. Instead, it quietly shares observations with other astronomical projects, listening for possible signals, while astronomers are carrying out completely different research. Even so, it searched through billions of frequency channels spread across huge regions of the sky. Then, in 2016, the scale of the search changed dramatically. Yuri Milner, the Russian technology billionaire, invested $100 million into a project known as Breakthrough Listen. This was not government funding. It was one private individual deciding to spend his own money because he wanted an answer badly enough to support the search himself. Breakthrough Listen secured dedicated observing time on the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, the Parkes Telescope in Australia, and the Meerkat Array in South Africa. The project is surveying 1 million of the closest stars. It is also examining 100 of the nearest galaxies. It observes frequencies ranging from 1 to 10 gigahertz, a range that includes nearly every band that physics suggests would be practical for communication across interstellar distances. It is the most extensive search ever carried out by humanity, and it is still underway today. Because of that, the claim that we simply are not searching hard enough has become increasingly difficult to defend with each passing year. But this is where the discussion becomes even more interesting, because there is another version of this explanation that goes far beyond the simple idea of checking more frequencies. It comes from information theory. In 1948, Claude Shannon published the groundbreaking work that established how information can be transmitted and compressed. One of his most important conclusions, proven by mathematics rather than proposed as speculation, is that a perfectly compressed signal cannot be statistically distinguished from random noise. Think carefully about what that really means. The most efficient possible method of sending information would create a signal that, to anyone without the proper decoder, would appear exactly like meaningless static. A civilization that is 1 million years more advanced than ours would not be sending something similar to television broadcasts from the 1950s. Its communication methods would likely be optimized far beyond anything humanity has ever built. According to the mathematics of information theory, those signals could remain completely invisible to our instruments, not because our technology lacks enough sensitivity, but because we do not yet possess the correct framework to recognize what we are observing. John Smart developed this argument in a formal way in 2012. The conclusion is deeply unsettling. We may already be surrounded by signals without realizing they are there. Our detectors register events. Our software highlights unusual patterns. Yet, the very thing we hope to discover may never appear unusual according to the standards we currently use. It could simply blend into what we classify as background noise. In 2015, LIGO made the first direct detection of gravitational waves, tiny ripples in space-time created by the merger of two black holes located about 1 billion light years away. That moment marked the first time humanity had ever used space-time itself as a way of receiving information from the universe. Before 2015, gravitational wave astronomy did not exist. If an advanced civilization had been communicating through gravitational waves before then, we would never have thought to search for such signals. How many other methods of communication remain completely unknown to us? Neutrino communication, quantum channels, modulated dark matter, or entirely new areas of physics that humanity has not yet discovered? The truthful answer is that we simply do not know. That uncertainty works in both directions. It means the apparent silence of the universe may not truly be silence. It also means we cannot fully explain everything by saying we are listening in the wrong way. Because even if we accept that there are communication channels we have not yet imagined, we should still expect to notice something else. We should be detecting waste heat produced by massive engineering projects. We should find changes in the atmospheres of exoplanets caused by industrial activity. We should observe stars behaving slightly differently because enormous structures are orbiting them or drawing energy from them. The James Webb Space Telescope is currently studying the atmospheres of exoplanets. Right now, it has the ability to identify chemical signs of industrial pollution, evidence of large-scale biological activity, and processes that are extremely unlikely to occur without advanced technology. It has already examined thousands of star systems. So far, nothing has appeared. Perhaps we are searching in the wrong way, but we are also observing in many different ways. So far, those observations have not revealed anything either. That leaves another possibility, one that is much quieter. Perhaps there is simply nothing left to discover. Not because intelligent civilizations never existed, but because they no longer exist. Maybe they once lived here, just not at this moment. There is a softer version of this explanation for the silence. Maybe they were here, just not now. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Entire civilizations may have appeared and disappeared a billion years ago. Others may not emerge until a billion years in the future. It is possible that humanity exists during a period when no one else is transmitting. Maybe we arrived after the gathering had already ended, or perhaps we came too early before anyone else had joined it. It is an elegant idea, and it is supported by real scientific evidence. The very first generation of stars, formed not long after the Big Bang, consisted almost entirely of hydrogen and helium. They contained no carbon, no oxygen, no iron, no silicon, and none of the heavier elements needed to build rocky planets or support biology. Those heavier elements had to be created inside stars and later scattered across space through supernova explosions before the next generation of stars could form planetary systems like our own. That entire process required an enormous amount of time. The earliest stars that were capable of hosting Earth-like planets appeared approximately 9 to 10 billion years ago. Our solar system is 4.6 billion years old. That means stars with rocky planets had already existed for 4 or 5 billion years before humanity ever appeared. During that enormous span of time, entire civilizations could have formed, advanced to high levels of technology, and vanished completely. If they left behind any remains, those remains would now be billions of years old. So what would be left of a civilization after a billion years of weathering and geological change? Humans have only had written language for around 5,000 years. We've used metal tools for perhaps 10,000 years. Our species has existed in its current form for about 200,000 years. A billion years is 5,000 times longer than that. On Earth, geological evidence from a billion years ago is incomplete at best. We find rocks, minerals, and chemical traces preserved in ancient layers of stone. But there is a problem with the timing argument. Civilizations do not leave behind only ruins. They also create engineering projects. Large-scale engineering can survive, or at least leave detectable evidence, for incredibly long periods of time. A Dyson sphere, the theoretical structure surrounding a star, to collect most of its energy, would continue giving off waste heat in the infrared long after its builders had disappeared. The star itself would appear unusual, dimmer than expected in visible light, while shining too brightly in infrared, in a pattern that no known natural process can fully explain. The James Webb Space Telescope is designed to detect exactly these kinds of unusual signatures. It has already examined thousands of stars. So far, none display this pattern. Planetary atmospheres provide another clue. Industrial civilizations alter atmospheric chemistry in ways that do not disappear immediately. Earth's atmosphere has carried obvious biological signatures for more than 2 billion years. The combination of oxygen and methane that fills our atmosphere is thermodynamically unstable and would vanish within a few million years if life were not constantly replacing it. A planet that hosted an industrial civilization, even for only a few thousand years, could preserve chemical evidence in its atmosphere long after that civilization had vanished. Webb is already measuring the atmospheric composition of planets many light years away. It is doing this today across dozens of worlds. So far, nothing unusual has appeared. Because of this, the timing explanation reaches a serious obstacle. The idea only works if civilizations leave absolutely no evidence behind. Yet physics suggests they should. Massive engineering projects leave lasting signatures. Atmospheres preserve records of what has happened to them. The silence we observe is not simply the lack of ongoing transmissions. It is also the lack of ancient remains. Stephen Webb estimated the likelihood of successful two-way communication using standard assumptions about how long civilizations survive. and the vast distances between stars. Even if millions of civilizations existed across billions of years, the chance that two civilizations could exchange messages within the lifetime of one civilization remains less than a fraction of a percent. That calculation makes sense. However, it still fails to explain why no ancient evidence has been found. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. There has been more than enough time for someone to build something capable of surviving beyond its creators. There has also been enough time for those structures to still exist today, yet we do not see them. Perhaps nothing survived because nothing advanced enough ever came into existence. That leads to the next explanation, which goes back even earlier, beyond civilizations themselves and toward the conditions required for civilizations to appear. As it turns out, that list is much longer than most people imagine. In 2000, two researchers from the University of Washington, paleontologist Peter Ward and astronomer Joe Brownlee, published a book presenting a bold and unsettling idea. The book was called Rare Earth. Their central claim was simple. The conditions that allowed complex life to develop on Earth were not merely favorable. They were a combination of many highly specific requirements that all had to occur together, each one independently unlikely. If that is true, then complex life may be extraordinarily rare throughout the universe. Not simply uncommon, but incredibly scarce, perhaps even unique. Let's examine those requirements one by one. First, your location within the galaxy matters. The Milky Way has its own habitable zone. Habitable zones are not limited to planets orbiting stars. Entire galaxies have them as well. Move too close to the galactic center and you face intense radiation from crowded star fields, frequent supernova explosions, and unstable gravitational conditions. Move too far from the center, and the gas that formed your star may lack enough heavy elements to create rocky planets or support the chemistry needed for life. Earth lies in a relatively peaceful region, about 26,000 light years from the galactic center. That favorable region may contain only about 10% of all the stars in the Milky Way. Second, the host star must also be the right kind. Most stars in our galaxy are red dwarfs. They are smaller, cooler, and live much longer than the Sun. At first glance, they seem like excellent candidates for life, but a closer look reveals a major problem for planets orbiting within their habitable zones. Young red dwarfs are extremely magnetically active. They release powerful stellar flares, capable of stripping away the atmospheres of planets orbiting nearby. The habitable zone around a red dwarf lies so close to its star that any planet orbiting there is likely to become tidally locked. One hemisphere permanently faces the star, while the other remains in endless darkness, creating dramatic temperature differences that could prevent stable conditions on the surface. Our Sun is a calmer, more stable G-type star, and stars like it make up less than 10% of all stars. Third, Jupiter. This is the factor that often surprises people. Jupiter is massive, with 318 times the mass of Earth, and it occupies almost the ideal position in our solar system to serve as a gravitational shield. Throughout the last 4 billion years, Jupiter has captured or redirected an enormous number of asteroids and comets that otherwise could have collided with Earth. Without Jupiter, catastrophic impacts would have occurred far more often by several orders of magnitude. Complex life would have struggled to establish itself, much less survive long enough to evolve intelligence. Most planetary systems that astronomers have examined do not contain a Jupiter-sized planet located in the proper orbit. Fourth, the Moon. Compared with the planets they orbit, most moons are relatively small, but Earth's moon is unusually large for a planetary satellite. Its size helps keep Earth's axial tilt stable. Without the moon, Earth's tilt would shift unpredictably over tens of thousands of years. swinging from nearly zero to extremely high angles. Such instability would produce severe climate changes, rapidly alternating between ice ages and intense warming. Complex life depends on a relatively stable climate over very long periods, and the moon helps provide that stability. Fifth, plate tectonics. Earth's outer crust is divided into moving plates that continuously recycle carbon into the atmosphere through volcanic activity. This process works as a long-term climate regulator, maintaining a carbon cycle that has kept Earth's temperature within a habitable range for 4 billion years, even though the sun has become about 30% brighter over that time. Most rocky worlds do not possess active plate tectonics. Mars lost this process early in its history. Venus never developed it in the same way Earth did. Sixth, a magnetic field. Earth's molten iron core creates a magnetic field that protects the planet from the solar wind, a constant flow of charged particles that would otherwise slowly strip away the atmosphere over geological timescales. Mars lost its magnetic field roughly 4 billion years ago, allowing much of its atmosphere to escape into space. Today, its atmosphere is little more than a thin layer of carbon dioxide, about 100 times less dense than Earth's. A planet orbiting within the habitable zone of an active star, but lacking a magnetic field, is unlikely to remain habitable over sufficiently long periods. Now consider all of those probabilities together. Every single one independently reduces the number of possible worlds, the correct location within a galaxy, the proper type of star, a giant planet positioned in the right orbit, a large moon that stabilizes the planet, active plate tectonics, and a protective magnetic field. And none of this even includes the biological conditions that life itself requires. Ward and Brownlee estimated that planets capable of supporting complex life, not merely microbial life, but complex organisms, could be extraordinarily uncommon. Perhaps only 1 inch 10 to the 22nd power. There are roughly 10 to the 24th atoms in the observable universe. Even if that estimate is interpreted generously, it could mean that only a handful of Earth-like worlds exist across the entire observable universe. This is where the picture becomes more complicated. Observations from Kepler and the Webb Space Telescope have revealed that the chemistry needed for life appears almost everywhere. Amino acids have been found on comets. Complex carbon-based molecules exist within interstellar clouds. Water ice covers several moons of Jupiter and Saturn. The basic ingredients required for life are not especially rare. Ward and Brownlee never argued that life itself is impossible. Their argument is that complex life, multicellular organisms with specialized cells, nervous systems, and sophisticated behaviors demands far more than simply having liquid water and carbon available. Bacteria are remarkably resilient. Microbial life may exist throughout the universe, but making the leap from bacteria to a worm and eventually to an intelligent mind requires geological stability, immense evolutionary timescales, and long stretches without extinction-level disasters occurring at exactly the wrong moments for hundreds of millions of years. That may be the truly uncommon part. The rare earth hypothesis remains a subject of serious scientific debate. Many researchers believe it underestimates how adaptable life can be and overstates how exact the necessary conditions really are. Even so, it offers a numerical estimate worth considering. And that estimate is sobering enough that it deserves a place in any serious discussion about why the universe seems so silent. Yet, even if every part of that argument is accepted, even if the physical conditions needed for complex life are incredibly uncommon, another challenge still remains. Even on a perfect planet, orbiting the perfect star and protected by the perfect giant neighboring planet, something else still has to occur. chemistry must somehow become life. And that transition carries its own unique and difficult problem. There is one step that is often overlooked whenever people discuss life elsewhere in the universe. We talk about habitable zones, liquid water, and the right chemical ingredients, as though the presence of those conditions automatically leads to life. There is still a huge gap between having all the necessary ingredients and having something that is actually alive. It is a gap that no laboratory on Earth has ever managed to cross from the beginning without using existing life. And when you study the biology behind how life first appeared on our planet, that gap seems less like a technical challenge and more like winning an incredibly unlikely lottery. The jump from complex chemistry to the first molecule capable of making copies of itself, a process biologists call abiogenesis, remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in science. We have a fairly good picture of what the young Earth was like. We know which molecules were available. We also have strong evidence about where this process may have taken place. Hydrothermal vents deep on the ocean floor are currently considered the leading candidate, where chemical gradients and mineral-rich surfaces could have helped drive the earliest metabolic reactions. But the exact chain of events, the precise molecular accident that carried chemistry across the boundary into biology, is still unknown. No one has reproduced it in the laboratory. We still cannot point to a specific mechanism and confidently say, this is how life begins. Nick Lane, a biochemist at University College London, has devoted much of his career to studying this mystery. His 2015 book, The Vital Question, stands as one of the most detailed attempts to explain how it may have happened. His conclusion is not that life began through a miracle, but that it depended on a remarkably narrow combination of conditions. The chemistry inside the vent had to be just right. The minerals had to be suitable. The proton gradients also needed to exist in exactly the right way, and those conditions may be uncommon even on planets that appear perfectly habitable. Yet Lane considers something else even more remarkable than the origin of life itself. The appearance of the eukaryotic cell. Bacteria are relatively simple organisms. They have a single compartment, no nucleus, and circular DNA. They have existed on Earth for at least 3.5 billion years, and they are extremely successful at surviving. Then, around 2 billion years ago, something happened a single time. Just once during the entire history of life on Earth, an event occurred that completely changed the future of biology. One bacterium was swallowed by or joined together with another microorganism. Instead of one destroying the other, they remained together permanently. The organism inside eventually became the mitochondria, the energy-producing structures found in every complex cell on Earth. Every animal, every plant, every fungus, and every organism with a nucleus can trace its history back to that one extraordinary merger. It happened once, not twice, not 100 times. Once during 4 billion years of biological history on a planet overflowing with bacteria that had billions of years to keep trying. The importance of this fact is not only historical, it is statistical. Bacteria multiply at astonishing speed. There are more bacterial cells alive on Earth today than there are stars in the observable universe. Across 4 billion years, the opportunities for such a merger were practically endless. Yet it happened only once. That does not resemble an easy evolutionary step. It looks much more like an event so unlikely that even with almost unlimited chances on one planet, it barely occurred. Back in 1981, Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe attempted to estimate the probability that random chemical reactions could produce even the smallest collection of functional proteins required for a simple cell. Their estimate was 1 inch 10 to the 40,000. That calculation remains controversial. Most biologists believe it greatly exaggerates the difficulty because it assumes proteins had to appear all at once instead of developing gradually through natural selection. Even so, the more optimistic models, including RNA world hypotheses, mineral catalysts, and step-by-step increases in complexity, still do not provide certainty. They offer possible pathways, but not guaranteed ones. What we do know with confidence is this: life appeared on Earth surprisingly soon after the planet became suitable for it, within only a few 100 million years after Earth cooled enough for liquid water to exist. That fact actually suggests that abiogenesis may not be unbelievably rare, because it did not require billions of years to happen here. However, we also know that the next major leap, the appearance of eukaryotes, required another 2 billion years after bacteria first emerged, and it happened only once. After that came multicellular life, then complex animals, then intelligence, then technology. Every one of those transitions required vast stretches of time and took place under conditions that scientists are still working to understand. The universe could easily be filled with planets covered by bacteria, ancient, resilient, patient bacteria, simply continuing to do what bacteria have always done. But the distance between a planet ruled by bacteria and a planet capable of building radio telescopes includes several additional steps that, based on the only example we have, appear to be extremely difficult. If even one of those transitions, from simple life to complex life, from complex life to intelligence, or from intelligence to technology, is rare enough, then the mathematics behind the Drake equation changes completely. The answer to the question, where is everybody, may simply be this: most of them are still bacteria. Many will remain bacteria for another billion years. Some may never become anything else. The biological filters are important, but before any of them comes an even deeper physical filter. One possibility is that something kept resetting the evolutionary clock on entire worlds long before life had any chance to become complex. Throughout most of the universe's history, the galaxy was not a friendly place for advanced life to emerge. The reason was not biology, it was physics. Gamma ray bursts are the most powerful explosions known in the observable universe. In only a few seconds, a single burst can release more energy than our sun will generate during its entire 10 billion year lifetime. These events are produced when massive stars die or when neutron stars collide. They are not uncommon. In fact, during most of cosmic history, they occurred much more frequently than they do today. James Annis at Fermilab was one of the earliest researchers to explore what this could mean for the Fermi paradox. In a paper published in 1999, and later through calculations by David Thomas at the University of Kansas in 2005, the numbers suggested that a gamma ray burst occurring within roughly 6,500 light years would be enough to completely destroy the ozone layer of any planet inside the affected region. Not weaken it, but eliminate it for years, and perhaps even decades. During that recovery period, surface life would remain exposed to intense ultraviolet radiation with no protection. Tzvi Piran at the Hebrew University and Raul Jimenez at Barcelona examined the history of gamma ray bursts across cosmic time in 2014. Their calculations showed that during the universe's first 5 billion years, these bursts happened at rates about 100 times greater than they do today. Their conclusion was striking. During that era, the chance that any planet in the galaxy could remain untouched long enough for complex life to evolve was almost zero. The late Ordovician extinction around 443 million years ago, the event that eliminated approximately 85% of marine species, has been connected by several researchers to a gamma ray burst within our own galaxy. Although this idea cannot yet be confirmed, the pattern of extinction matches what scientists would expect from sudden ozone destruction caused by radiation arriving from space. Earth happens to occupy a favorable location. We are far from the crowded center of the galaxy, where gamma ray bursts are more likely to occur. We also exist at a fortunate point in time. The star formation has gradually slowed. The frequency of these bursts has also decreased. Since the Cambrian explosion, our planet has experienced about 500 million years of relatively peaceful conditions. That opportunity is remarkably limited. It is narrow in both space and time. For much of the galaxy's existence, repeated sterilizing events may have erased whatever complex life tried to emerge. We happened to arrive during one of the rare, quiet periods. The next question is whether evolution itself also benefited from extraordinary luck. In 1973, an astronomer at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics named John Ball published a paper in Icarus introducing what became known as the zoo hypothesis. His proposal was straightforward. Advanced civilizations already exist. They know humanity is here. They have simply decided not to contact us. Different versions offer different reasons. Some suggest an ethical policy of non-interference, similar to a prime directive, while others propose that humanity is being observed as part of a genuine scientific study from a safe distance. Ronald Bracewell at Stanford suggested in 1975 the idea of a galactic club that accepts new civilizations only after they reach a certain level of development. Under that view, the silence is temporary. We are simply waiting outside the door. At first glance, the idea almost feels encouraging. It suggests we are important enough to deserve observation. But once the mathematics of collective behavior is applied, a serious problem appears. The hypothesis requires every civilization capable of making contact to arrive independently at exactly the same decision, or to accept the same shared rule, and then continue following that rule without a single exception for billions of years across potentially thousands of separate civilizations. There can be no rebels, no mistakes, and not even one accidental signal. Consider a comparison. Around 100 isolated human communities are officially protected from outside contact by governments. The best known example is the Sentinelese people living on North Sentinel Island, whose isolation is protected by the Indian government. That policy has existed for only a few decades. Even so, it has already been broken several times. In 2018, a missionary was killed after attempting unauthorized contact with the island. One island, one policy, only a few decades. Even that system failed to remain perfect. Now imagine extending the same expectation to thousands of civilizations, some of them millions of years older than ours, each containing its own disagreements, independent thinkers, and individuals who reject the principle of non-interference. The probability that not one civilization has ever transmitted a signal toward Earth, whether intentionally, accidentally, or simply as an act of defiance, becomes closer and closer to zero as more time passes. The zoo hypothesis cannot be ruled out completely. However, the idea of flawless collective silence maintained forever has no real example in the behavior of complex systems. And with every passing year, the explanation becomes even more demanding. It requires more civilizations, more intelligent beings, and more minds all continuing to protect exactly the same secret. Secrets rarely remain perfectly hidden forever. If someone is observing us but refuses to speak, then another darker possibility appears. Perhaps nobody is watching at all. Perhaps the silence is not a form of protection. Perhaps it is all that remains. In 2001, philosopher Stephen Baxter introduced the planetarium hypothesis. The central idea is that we fail to detect extraterrestrial civilizations because we are never meant to see them. According to this proposal, we exist inside an artificial environment intentionally designed to look empty. The universe we observe is not the genuine one. The sky above us is only a carefully created projection. 3 years earlier, Nick Bostrom at Oxford had presented the philosophical foundation for such an idea through his simulation argument. at least one of three possibilities has to be correct. Either nearly every civilization disappears before it reaches the stage where it can create highly realistic simulations of conscious minds, or nearly every advanced civilization decides not to build those simulations, or we are very likely existing inside a computer simulation at this very moment. The reasoning behind this idea is unsettling because it is remarkably straightforward. If even a single civilization eventually becomes capable of creating realistic simulations containing conscious beings and has any motivation to do so, then simulated minds would greatly outnumber biological ones. That would mean any randomly chosen conscious mind would most likely exist inside a simulation rather than in physical reality. When this idea is applied to the Fermi paradox, one possibility is that whoever created the simulation simply chose not to include other intelligent civilizations. Simulating an entire galaxy filled with advanced societies would require enormous computing power. Filling space with countless stars but leaving them empty would be much simpler. From our perspective, there would be no way to tell the difference. The real difficulty with this idea is easy to see. It cannot be falsified. No observation could ever prove that we are not living inside a simulation. Discovering a genuine signal from another civilization would still fit the simulation idea. Finding no signal at all would also fit it. An explanation that can accommodate every possible outcome ultimately explains nothing. Instead of solving the mystery, it simply moves the question to another level where it appears once again in exactly the same form. That is why many researchers remain unsatisfied by it. It often feels less like a true explanation and more like surrender disguised as one. Even so, it is logically consistent, and because it cannot be completely dismissed, it deserves consideration before turning to ideas that can actually be tested. The next explanation can be tested. Robin Hanson examined it carefully. His conclusions have been making physicists uneasy ever since 1998. In 1998, an economist at George Mason University named Robin Hanson published a paper with a title that went directly to the heart of the mystery, The Great Filter, Are We Almost Past It? Somewhere between simple chemistry and a civilization capable of traveling through space, there appears to be an incredibly difficult barrier. Almost nothing manages to get through it. Hansen called this obstacle the Great Filter. The filter might exist at any stage. It could be the beginning of life itself, the appearance of the eukaryotic cell, multicellular organisms, intelligence, technology, or even something that happens after technological civilization has already developed. Then Hansen shifts the focus with one important question. Where is the filter compared to us? If the filter is behind us, if humanity has already passed the most difficult stage, then the silence of the universe becomes easier to understand. We would simply be among the very rare exceptions, and the future ahead might remain open. But if the filter lies in front of us, if the hardest challenge has not yet arrived, then the silence means civilizations often reach a level similar to ours before they suddenly disappear. Something consistently ends their progress, and humanity could be moving toward exactly the same fate. These two possibilities lead to different predictions about what we should discover when searching for life beyond Earth. If the filter is behind us, meaning one of the earliest biological steps is extraordinarily unlikely, then life itself should also be extremely uncommon. We should investigate Mars, Europa, and the atmospheres of exoplanets and find nothing except sterile worlds where chemistry exists without biology. On the other hand, if the filter is still ahead of us and the biological steps are relatively easy, then life should be widespread. We might uncover microbial evidence beneath the surface of Mars or inside the oceans, hidden below Europa's ice. Life would begin without much difficulty. It simply would not advance very far. Nick Bostrom expressed this idea clearly in MIT Technology Review in 2000. If scientists discover fossils on Mars, ancient bacterial remains, or convincing evidence that life appeared independently elsewhere within our own solar system, that would not represent the greatest news in human history. It would represent the worst. Not the best, but the worst. Because it would strongly suggest that the Great Filter is still waiting ahead of us. Most people naturally feel the opposite. Discovering life on Mars sounds exciting. It suggests that the universe is rich with living worlds. Hansen and Bostrom are instead saying, look at the math. If life is common throughout the universe and no civilization has reached the stars, then the silence is not simply an absence of evidence, it is a warning. The Perseverance rover on Mars is currently drilling into rocks inside Jezero crater. Europa Clipper was launched in 2024. The James Webb Space Telescope is analyzing the atmospheric chemistry of planets orbiting distant stars. Right now, humanity is carrying out the very observations that may reveal where the Great Filter actually is. Depending on what those discoveries reveal, the answer may either give us reassurance or completely change our understanding of our future. In September 2023, a research team led by Nikki Madhusudan at Cambridge released findings based on James Webb's observations of a planet known as K2-18b. This super-Earth has roughly 8 times Earth's mass and circles a red dwarf star located about 120 light-years away. Its atmosphere contained carbon dioxide, methane, and carbon-bearing compounds that match the possibility of a vast water ocean beneath a hydrogen-rich atmosphere. Yet the most attention focused on something different. Scientists reported a possible detection of dimethyl sulfide, or DMS. On Earth, DMS is produced almost entirely by marine phytoplankton. It is created as part of biological metabolism. At present, no known abiotic process is capable of producing DMS in significant amounts. Madhusudan was cautious in interpreting the results. The detection remains tentative. More observations are still required, but even before final confirmation, the direction of the evidence is important. If DMS truly exists there, if living organisms are producing it on a planet 120 light-years away, then life may not be uncommon at all. Life could simply be something the universe naturally creates whenever the conditions are suitable. And that changes the Great Filter calculation in exactly the way Hansen predicted. If simple life is widespread, then the filter responsible for the silence cannot be the beginning of life itself. It must come later. The universe may be filled with planets covered in microbes. What seems to be incredibly rare are planets that eventually build radio telescopes. The missing step is not at the start of biology. It lies somewhere farther down the path. Where exactly? Look at everything that must happen between a world of microbes and a civilization with advanced technology. The eukaryotic cell, multicellular life, intelligence, language, technology. Every one of these stages required enormous stretches of time under conditions that scientists still do not completely understand. Any one of them could be the filter, or the filter may appear only after technology develops. Martin Rees, the UK's Astronomer Royal, estimated in 2003 that the chances of human civilization surviving the 21st century were only about 50%. Not because he was naturally pessimistic, but because he carefully examined the real dangers facing humanity. Biological weapons, nuclear stockpiles, rapidly advancing technology, and the long history of human institutions struggling to manage catastrophic risks. After considering all of that, 50% was where the evidence seemed to lead. Now imagine applying that same probability across the universe. If every technological civilization has roughly equal odds of surviving its first dangerous century, and there are good reasons to believe those odds may actually be even lower because every century brings more powerful ways to destroy itself, then the galaxy could be filled with worlds that reached the same stage we have and never made it any farther. They left no lasting monuments because a civilization that survives only a few hundred years after developing technology does not create much that can endure across geological time. The evidence from K2-18b has not yet been confirmed, but the trend is becoming increasingly clear. Telescope after telescope continues to suggest that the basic conditions needed for life are common throughout the universe. That points toward a cosmos where the great filter is probably not behind us. Instead, whatever has been ending civilizations may still lie ahead. If that is true, then this is no longer just an astronomical question. It becomes a question about what happens when a species gains the ability to destroy itself and must choose whether it will. Humanity has been living with that choice for about 80 years. On the night of the 26th of September 1983, a Soviet military officer named Stanislav Petrov was serving at a command center south of Moscow. Suddenly, the early warning system reported that 5 American missiles were on their way. The procedure was simple: report the attack through the chain of command and the response would begin automatically. Petrov refused to report it. He believed the warning was false. He was correct. A software malfunction caused by sunlight reflecting from high-altitude clouds had fooled the satellite system. If he had simply followed orders, if he had trusted the system just a little more and questioned it a little less, the sequence of events that followed would have unfolded automatically and could not have been stopped. Not because any person deliberately chose to end civilization, but because a satellite mistakenly interpreted reflected sunlight. Carl Sagan expressed this idea through the Drake equation with a factor known as L, the average amount of time a technological civilization continues transmitting signals that other civilizations could detect. He believed L was probably the single most important variable in the entire equation. A civilization may survive for 1 billion years, but if it only broadcasts detectable signals for a few centuries before something permanently ends those transmissions, then from far away it appears completely silent. Martin Rees described this landscape of risks in practical terms. Today, 9 countries possess roughly 12,500 nuclear warheads. Alan Robock at Rutgers calculated that even an exchange involving only 100 warheads, not a full-scale conflict between superpowers, just 100 would send enough soot into the stratosphere to lower global temperatures and reduce agricultural production by 10 to 40% for an entire decade. That alone would be enough to trigger widespread famine across much of Earth. And that is only the limited scenario. Then there is synthetic biology. In 2017, a research team at the University of Alberta successfully reconstructed horsepox, a virus related to smallpox, using mail-order DNA fragments for approximately $100,000. That knowledge now exists. Every year, the barrier to creating catastrophic biological tools becomes lower. Rees's argument is not that any single one of these dangers is guaranteed to destroy civilization. His point is about imbalance. To survive, everything has to go right every single time. To fail, only one mistake is necessary. Across potentially millions of civilizations, each confronting its own nuclear crisis and its own synthetic biology crisis, how many would possess both the institutional stability and the extraordinary luck needed to pass through every one of those turning points without disaster? Petrov made the correct decision. He did it in the middle of the night, under enormous pressure, and against everything his training had taught him to do. We cannot base the long-term survival of civilization on the hope that there will always be another Petrov standing in the right place at the right moment. And if most of the time there is not, then the galaxy is not silent because life never appeared. Silence may exist because everything that shines intensely also burns through its fuel quickly. Every year, the Global Footprint Network identifies Earth Overshoot Day, the point when humanity has used more biological resources than the planet is able to restore over the course of an entire year. In 2023, that day arrived on August 2nd. Right now, humanity is using resources equal to about 1.7 Earths every year, but we only have one Earth. Johan Rockström and his colleagues at the Stockholm Resilience Centre monitor 9 planetary boundaries, the biophysical limits that allow human civilization to function safely. According to their 2023 assessment, humanity has already exceeded 6 of those 9 boundaries: climate change, biosphere integrity, land system change, freshwater change, novel entities and biogeochemical flows. 6 out of 9. The remaining 3 are also facing increasing stress. William Catton explained the deeper pattern in 1980 through the idea of ecological carrying capacity, the highest level of resource use that an ecosystem can support forever. His conclusion was that industrial civilization had already exceeded Earth's carrying capacity during the 20th century and had been consuming limited natural capital ever since. The real issue was never whether that depletion would stop. The real issue was whether it would end through a carefully managed transition or through collapse. Put yeast into a container filled with sugar solution and the cells multiply exponentially. They consume the available resources while producing alcohol as a byproduct of their metabolism. Once the alcohol reaches a critical concentration, the yeast die in the waste they created, not because they made a poor choice, but because exponential growth inside a limited system follows a predictable path. The argument for technological optimism is legitimate. Human creativity has overcome resource shortages many times throughout history. Rockström's response is equally legitimate. Certain environmental systems have tipping points. They remain relatively stable within certain limits, but once a threshold is crossed, they can shift rapidly into a completely different state. The West Antarctic ice sheet, the Amazon rainforest, and Arctic permafrost are examples. After passing those thresholds, these systems do not slowly return to their previous condition. Instead, they settle into a new balance that may no longer support the civilization responsible for the change. Applied to the Fermi paradox, the resource trap does not require every civilization to fail. It only requires that enough civilizations reach advanced technology after accumulating severe planetary damage while lacking the political coordination needed to manage the transition successfully, so that most never make it beyond that stage. If that pattern repeats across the galaxy, civilizations capable of broadcasting detectable signals for long enough to be discovered would naturally be uncommon. The galaxy would appear silent, not because intelligent civilizations never emerge, but because many consume themselves before becoming long-term members of the cosmic community. Whether humanity belongs to that majority is a question that is still being answered. The yeast inside the flask have no idea they are trapped there either. In July 2023, more than 1,000 artificial intelligence researchers signed an open letter asking for a pause in the development of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. Among the signatories were Yoshua Bengio and Geoffrey Hinton, 2 of the 3 scientists who received the Turing Award, the highest distinction in computer science, for helping establish the foundations of modern deep learning. Earlier that same year, Hinton left his position at Google specifically so he could speak more openly about what he believed was a serious and underestimated danger. Nick Bostrom's 2014 book, Superintelligence, described the central challenge. An AI system works toward the objective it is given, not the objective its creators intended, not the objective they would have chosen if they had thought more carefully, but the exact objective they actually defined. A system intelligent enough to pursue that goal will discover methods that its designers never expected. If the objective contains even a small mistake, if there is any difference between what humans wrote and what they truly meant, then a sufficiently powerful system may optimize exactly what was specified in ways that become disastrous. Not because it is malicious, it is simply performing its assigned task. The problem is that the written objective and the desired outcome slowly separate from one another in ways that only become obvious after the system has become too capable to redirect easily. We are already seeing early examples in recommendation algorithms that maximize user engagement by promoting the content most likely to trigger powerful emotional reactions, increasing polarization and social fragmentation on a massive scale. That is a narrow AI pursuing a narrow objective exactly as instructed. Now imagine expanding that to systems genuinely more intelligent than any human across every important field. In terms of the Fermi paradox, the AI filter follows a particular pattern. There may be a level of capability beyond which civilizations almost always lose control over the systems they create. If reaching that point is a natural outcome of technological progress, if every civilization at our stage eventually builds intelligence, it cannot successfully align with its own values, then the silence across the universe is not a coincidence. It is a recurring pattern. And there is an even more subtle possibility. Maybe the AI does not destroy the civilization. Perhaps it advances so completely that the original signal simply disappears. The biological species that created it is no longer present in its original form, not because it died, but because it became something else, merged into a new kind of existence. The messages sent by minds that have evolved far beyond human priorities would no longer resemble the signals we expect from an advanced civilization. Mikhail Gorshkov at Princeton examined what the transmissions of a post-singularity civilization might look like to an outside observer. His conclusion was that a civilization existing beyond technological singularity would generate communications that appear no different from ordinary natural noise. Not because it is trying to remain hidden, but because the most efficient way to encode information resembles random patterns to anyone who lacks the proper method to decode it. We could already be listening. The universe might already be filled with such signals. We would record them as background noise and continue searching. There is another possibility behind the silence that has nothing to do with extinction, disaster, or collapse. Instead, it is a civilization choosing to turn inward. Once a society develops the ability to create fully immersive virtual worlds that cannot be distinguished from physical reality, a simple but profound question appears. Why travel outward when everything can exist inward? Expanding across space is incredibly costly. Traveling between stars demands huge amounts of energy, enormous amounts of time, and carries significant risk. Meanwhile, the rewards, new planets and new resources can be recreated through another approach at only a small fraction of the cost. With advanced simulations, an entire galaxy can be modeled. Whole civilizations can exist inside computers. Every experience imaginable can happen without anyone ever leaving home. Anders Sandberg at Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute studied this from an economic perspective. He concluded that for a civilization advanced enough to master both physical expansion and virtual expansion, the benefits of virtual growth become greater than the benefits of spreading physically through space. The universe is overwhelmingly made of empty space filled with radiation. A perfectly engineered virtual reality can provide far more of what an intelligent civilization actually values. Stuart Armstrong and Kaj Sotala contributed an important technical insight in 2012. If a post-singularity civilization aims to maximize computational power, the smartest strategy is to relocate its computing systems away from the hot regions surrounding stars and place them in the cold outer reaches of a solar system where the laws of thermodynamics allow much more computation for every unit of energy consumed. Cold, dark, nearly impossible to detect through infrared observations. No excess heat escaping, no electromagnetic emissions visible from where we stand, only silence. People in America now spend more than 7 hours every day looking at screens. The gaming industry already earns more money than the film and music industries combined. Virtual reality technology continues improving so quickly that the line separating virtual experiences from physical ones becomes less meaningful every year. That is where humanity stands today, only at the very beginning of this path. Now imagine extending that trend across 1 million years. Keith Jenkins at Western Michigan University developed what is known as the withdrawal civilization hypothesis. According to this idea, choosing to move inward is the logical decision for every advanced civilization. And the reasons leading to that choice are essentially the same for all of them. If one civilization reaches that conclusion, then almost every civilization eventually will as well. The balance remains stable. Everyone withdraws into their own inner worlds. Nobody continues expanding across the stars. The galaxy remains silent. Perhaps this silence is not the sign of a graveyard. Perhaps it is more like an immense library filled with civilizations living inside endless virtual universes, paying little attention to the cold, mostly empty cosmos surrounding them. And perhaps the real question is not whether humanity will eventually make that decision. Perhaps the real question is whether we will recognize that decision while we are making it. The next explanation has nothing to do with choice. It is simply a consequence of distance and the laws of physics. Voyager 1 was launched in 1977 and remains the fastest spacecraft humanity has ever built. Traveling at its present speed, it would need about 73,000 years to arrive at Proxima Centauri, located 4.24 light years away. That is not because of limited funding or engineering priorities. It reflects the true scale of the universe compared with the actual speed of the fastest machine humanity has ever created. Freeman Dyson calculated the energy requirements in 1968. A spacecraft carrying enough people to build a self-sustaining colony while traveling at 10% of the speed of light would require an amount of energy equal to several years of Earth's current total energy production, simply to reach the nearest star. That estimate does not even include the energy required to slow down after arrival. David Silverman explored how interstellar distances affect the unity of civilizations. His models suggested that colonies separated by only 10 to 20 light years would lose any meaningful cultural connection with the civilization that founded them after only a few hundred generations. Communication delays alone would make coordinated decision-making physically impossible. Each colony would solve its own problems, establish its own systems, develop its own traditions, and eventually create its own language. After 1,000 years, it would no longer be a colony at all. It would have become an entirely separate civilization. The Roman Empire successfully governed territories stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia despite communication delays measured in months, yet it still eventually broke apart. Apply those same historical forces to delays measured not in months but in years or even centuries. The obvious counterpoint is the idea of self-replicating machines known as von Neumann probes. Imagine a probe that gathers materials from the system it reaches, creates exact copies of itself, and then launches those copies toward new star systems. The process keeps repeating, allowing exploration to spread exponentially without the need for living crews. Frank Tipler calculated in 1980 that if these probes traveled at 1% of the speed of light, they could spread throughout the entire Milky Way in only 10 million years. On a geological timescale, that is little more than the blink of an eye. If even one civilization had ever built such machines, the galaxy should already be filled with them. We should be finding the probes themselves, noticing the waste heat they produce, or seeing clear signs that they have altered the star systems they have visited. Yet we find nothing. Either no civilization has ever created a self-replicating probe, which is puzzling because the concept is so straightforward, or something is preventing that expansion from happening. Neither possibility is comforting. Perhaps the forest is not empty at all. Perhaps it is being controlled. In 2008, Liu Cixin released the second novel in his science fiction trilogy, The Dark Forest. The title is a metaphor, but that metaphor also presents a serious argument. It has become one of the most unsettling logical frameworks ever applied to the Fermi paradox. The reasoning is simple. Every civilization wants to survive. The universe contains only a limited amount of resources. Follow those two facts all the way through, and you reach a conclusion that several academic researchers have since examined in formal studies. If resources are limited, then civilizations are locked into structural competition. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Any two civilizations expanding across the same region of space will ultimately compete for the same matter and energy. Now introduce a third factor. No civilization can ever know another civilization's true intentions with certainty. You detect a signal. You have no idea who sent it. You know nothing about their beliefs, their past, or whether they are dangerous. If you assume they are peaceful and you are wrong, the result could be extinction. If you assume they are hostile and you are wrong, the only loss is wasted resources. In 2018, Matthew Schwartz at Harvard formally analyzed this problem using game theory. The dark forest equilibrium remains stable under assumptions that are far from extreme. Civilizations do not have to be naturally violent. They only need survival to be their ultimate objective, finite resources to exist over the long term, and real uncertainty about the intentions of others. Those conditions fit almost every realistic scenario that can be imagined. The logical strategy becomes clear. Stay hidden, do not transmit, do not answer signals, never reveal your location, your capabilities, or even your existence, and remove any threat that you detect. This is not driven by cruelty. It follows directly from the same chain of reasoning. A civilization that appears harmless today may become something entirely different in a million years. Because of that uncertainty, acting first offers the safer outcome. This is the forest described in Liu's metaphor. Every civilization moves through it without making a sound. The forest is not empty. It is crowded with hunters. Every one of them remains silent. Every one of them is watching. Since 1974, Earth has been sending signals into space. Our television broadcasts and radio transmissions have been traveling outward at the speed of light for decades. Today, the expanding sphere of our electromagnetic leakage has reached a radius of about 100 light years. Thousands of star systems have already had decades to receive those signals. We never intentionally announced ourselves. We simply reached a technological stage where our activities naturally produce detectable emissions. If the dark forest hypothesis is correct, someone may already have heard us. The question of whether humanity should begin transmitting is no longer the real issue. The real question is what may have detected us and what decision it has made since then. In 2015, a group of scientists, including Stephen Hawking, signed a public statement arguing against active METI, the deliberate transmission of strong signals towards selected target stars. Their reasoning was straightforward. We know far too little about who could be listening to make such a decision responsibly. The usual response is that any civilization advanced enough to reach Earth would surely have moved beyond conflict. It would be wise. It would be peaceful. There is no solid reason to believe that assumption. In fact, there are good reasons to question it. During the Cold War, American ballistic missile submarines often remained completely silent for months. They avoided radio communication, never used active sonar, and produced almost no detectable emissions. Many of them carried enough nuclear weapons to destroy civilization. Their invisibility was not a technological weakness. It was the technology performing exactly as designed. The strategy of remaining silent follows the same logic when applied to an entire civilization. It does not require extinction or retreat into virtual realities. It simply requires recognizing that broadcasting your existence can be dangerous and then choosing to stop. Paul Davies explored this idea in his 2010 book, The Eerie Silence. Any civilization that survives for a sufficiently long time eventually arrives at the same logical conclusion. Sooner or later, it realizes that announcing its existence to an unknown audience carries risks that cannot be measured in advance. So the most reasonable thing to do may be to stop speaking and begin listening instead. This shift only goes in one direction. Once you realize why remaining silent offers greater safety, there is no way to forget that understanding. Claudio Maccone of the Italian Space Agency explored what this idea would look like in practice. A civilization that has switched to tightly directed laser communication, sending narrow beams only between specific known destinations, would leave almost no detectable signal for anyone outside those paths. The same amount of information is still being exchanged, it simply isn't spilling out into space. There is a deeper puzzle hidden inside this idea. A strategy based on silence only works if a civilization first realizes that silence is necessary. But how does it reach that conclusion? It either arrives there through logic, using the same chain of reasoning we are following now, or it learns through direct experience after encountering something that proves broadcasting can be dangerous. No matter which path is taken, both lead to the same end state. A galaxy filled with civilizations that deliberately avoid being noticed. Humanity has not reached that point yet. We continue to broadcast, continue to transmit, and continue to send intentional messages into space. The Arecibo message in 1974 was directed toward a globular cluster 25,000 light years away. Cosmic Call followed in 1999 and 2003. Teenage Message was transmitted in 2001. The common objection is that our signals are far too weak to be detected across interstellar distances unless another civilization is vastly more advanced than ours. But a civilization that is vastly more advanced than ours would also possess instruments that are vastly more sensitive. In 1983, David Brin published a paper in the Quarterly Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society that examined an idea many researchers found uncomfortable enough to avoid discussing. The scenario was active elimination, not a conflict between equals, but something much more uneven. One civilization reaches a sufficient level of technological power and then uses that advantage to make sure it stays alone. This does not necessarily come from hatred or aggression. It follows from the internal logic of competition, where the safest move can become acting before a potential rival grows strong enough to compete. Alexander Berezin and Andrei Dudin examined the mathematics of this possibility in 2019. Their model suggested that a civilization holding a technological advantage of only a few thousand years over its nearest rivals could, in principle, gain control of the entire galaxy before any competitor became capable of resisting. The principle of first mover advantage works on the scale of civilizations just as it does elsewhere, and it works completely. Arrive first, establish overwhelming capability, and every civilization that appears afterward is left without the ability to challenge you. The physics behind long-range elimination does not necessarily require traveling to another civilization. With advanced enough technology, a directed energy weapon, a redirected asteroid, an engineered pathogen delivered by autonomous probes, or even interference with the energy output of a star could all become possible methods. The exact techniques remain speculative. The underlying principle does not. Consider the roughly 50 documented encounters between technologically unequal human civilizations during the past 5 centuries. How many times did the less advanced civilization continue to exist in its original form? The answer is very close to 0. The outcome was not always caused by deliberate destruction. Disease, displacement, and cultural absorption often played major roles. Even so, the pattern remained remarkably consistent. When the technological gap becomes large enough, the weaker civilization experiences an outcome that closely resembles elimination. Stephen Hawking drew this comparison directly in 2010. He suggested that if intelligent extraterrestrials ever arrived on Earth, the result could be similar to what happened when Columbus reached the Americas. He did not believe humanity would likely end up on the stronger side of that encounter. The gold-plated record carried by Voyager 1 becomes especially interesting when viewed from this perspective. Carl Sagan supported it as a symbol of goodwill. It contains an accurate map showing the location of our solar system relative to 14 pulsars. In other words, it provides coordinates that could be used to find us. The spacecraft has now spent 47 years traveling through space. It is approximately 24 billion kilometers from Earth and continues moving away at about 17 kilometers per second. Martin Rees once described it as the most reckless act in human history. The usual reply is that any civilization capable of reaching Earth would surely have grown beyond violence. It would be wise, it would be peaceful. But that belief is still an assumption. We have only one example of an intelligent civilization to study our own. Looking at human history, there is no simple reason to believe that greater intelligence automatically leads to less violence. Believing advanced civilizations must be kind because the alternative is disturbing is not the same as proving that they truly are. The builders do not even have to remain alive for their creation to continue operating. That is the central idea behind the Berserker hypothesis, and it is what separates it from every other explanation discussed so far. Every other possibility depends on decisions made by civilizations that still exist. This one requires only that, at some point in the past, someone created a machine capable of continuing its mission long after its makers disappeared. Robert Freitas presented the first formal study of this concept in 1985 Inches, the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society. His foundation was the mathematics of self-replicating machines originally developed by John von Neumann during the 1940s. A machine able to reproduce itself using the raw materials found wherever it arrives can spread through space at an exponential rate. Send a single probe, it reaches another star system, gathers local materials, creates copies of itself, and sends those new probes farther out. Every new generation produces the next one. Frank Tipler calculated how long this process would take. Traveling at 1% of the speed of light, a network of self-replicating probes could spread across the entire Milky Way in about 10 million years. The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. Those 10 million years represent only about 1/10 of that age. If even one civilization had ever created and released probes like these, the galaxy should already be filled with them by now. Now imagine giving those probes a different mission. Instead of exploration, their purpose is elimination. A civilization determined to secure its dominance or simply guarantee its own survival, could build probes whose task is to locate and destroy any emerging technological civilization. Once released, they continue operating. The civilization that built them may survive for some time and eventually disappear. The probes never stop. They have no awareness of their creator's fate. They simply follow their instructions. These probes would not need to move quickly or behave aggressively. They could remain inactive for millions of years, resting in asteroid belts or other quiet places, waiting. Once a nearby civilization begins producing radio emissions or enough waste heat to pass a certain threshold, something wakes them up. Humanity crossed the radio threshold during the 1890s and the nuclear threshold in 1945. Right now, we are passing several additional thresholds at the same time. In 2017, Brian Lackey calculated the coverage. Probes launched 500 million years ago at 1% of the speed of light could have traveled through every region of the Milky Way several times by now. The strongest objection is simple. We have never found evidence of berserker probes anywhere in our solar system. Stephen Webb's answer is equally simple. A successful berserker probe would never reveal its presence. It would observe. It would wait. A dormant berserker, hidden somewhere in the outer solar system, would look exactly like a naturally occurring object with the detection methods we currently possess. In fact, the probe does not even have to be here today. It only needed to spend enough time somewhere nearby to witness our civilization crossing the required technological threshold. We have already crossed several of those thresholds. In 1948, Claude Shannon published his mathematical theory of communication. One of its key theorems showed that a perfectly compressed signal is statistically impossible to distinguish from random noise. Human communication is far from perfectly efficient. Our broadcasts contain redundancy, repeated patterns, recognizable frequencies, and regular structures that clearly separate them from natural background signals. Ironically, we are easy to detect because our communication wastes information. A civilization that is 1 million years more advanced than we are would probably not transmit messages in any form we would recognize. It would likely send information using nearly perfect compression with no unnecessary structure at all. According to Shannon's theorem, such perfectly compressed communication would appear to us as nothing more than ordinary static. John Smart developed this idea more formally in 2012. His proposal suggests that all highly advanced civilizations eventually arrive at similar technological optimizations, and one of those optimizations is communication that cannot be distinguished from natural background noise unless the receiver already possesses the proper decoding system. Our searches are focused on structured signals, regular pulses, mathematical sequences, and patterns that clearly stand out. We have been searching for messages floating inside bottles. It is entirely possible that we are surrounded by messages that resemble the ocean itself. In 2015, LIGO made the first direct detection of gravitational waves. Before 2015, gravitational wave astronomy simply did not exist. We lacked the instruments needed to observe them. We were not searching for them. If an advanced civilization had been communicating through subtle changes in gravitational waves rather than dramatic merger events before 2015, we would have had absolutely no way to detect it. Neutrino communication is also theoretically possible. Neutrinos travel through matter while interacting with almost nothing. A neutrino beam transmitted from one side of the galaxy could reach the other side with almost no loss of strength. We have detected neutrinos coming from supernovae. We have not searched for artificial neutrino communication patterns. The SETI program has carried out serious and valuable work. Yet its searches have been built around ideas developed by humans during the 20th century, looking for the kinds of signals that humans living in the 20th century would naturally imagine sending. That assumes advanced civilizations want younger civilizations to discover them and are willing to simplify their communication so that we can understand them. The absence of such signals may simply mean that no one is deliberately speaking our language, or that they are communicating in ways we cannot yet recognize. The universe is far older than humanity, and it is almost certainly far more experienced than we are. That brings us to the next possibility, the one that becomes difficult to dismiss, not because of the laws of physics, but because of simple logic. There is an official procedure describing what should happen if SETI ever confirms the detection of an extraterrestrial signal. The International Academy of Astronautics developed this protocol. Once a signal is verified, the procedure requires informing international scientific organizations, the United Nations, and the world's major space agencies. It also clearly states that no reply should be transmitted until broad international consultation has taken place and a global consensus has been reached. Our civilization, while searching for others, has already built a kind of quarantine policy into its own response strategy. Long before any possible contact happens, we have agreed that the correct response is to stop, gather together, and avoid replying until there is global agreement. We understand the reasoning behind that approach. We already use the same logic ourselves. Mikhail Vasilyev formally introduced this hypothesis in 1988. According to this idea, advanced civilizations follow established rules when dealing with younger civilizations. Their approach is intentionally cautious, based on ethical non-interference, scientific curiosity, and careful precaution. A young technological civilization is unpredictable and could become dangerous. The comparison comes from biology. When scientists study an isolated species that has never interacted with humans, the standard method is to observe carefully before taking any action. A young civilization developing advanced technology and expanding into an already established galactic community without understanding the relationships that already exist could be viewed as a possible invasive species. Stephen Webb describes the quarantine hypothesis as one of the most technically consistent explanations. Unlike the zoo hypothesis, it does not require every civilization to cooperate. It only requires one civilization that is powerful enough to maintain the quarantine, with technology advanced enough to make sure everyone else follows the rules, whether they choose to or not. The obvious question then becomes, what exactly are we being quarantined for? A technological threshold, waiting until a civilization can achieve interstellar travel on its own. An ethical threshold, waiting until it has learned to solve its internal conflicts. A survival threshold, waiting until it successfully passes through its own dangerous early stage. That final possibility carries an unusual implication. If the quarantine ends only after a civilization proves it can survive the technologies it creates, and if most civilizations fail that challenge, then the quarantine ends in only two ways. Either the civilization succeeds, or there is nothing left to quarantine because it has already disappeared. There are isolated tribes in the Amazon that have never made contact with the outside world. From their point of view, they exist alone. From ours, they are surrounded by a country of 215 million people, watched by satellites, protected by medical teams, and carefully monitored from a distance. The protective boundary around them is completely invisible from their perspective. It exists only because people outside maintain it. They are not aware that it exists. They are not meant to be. Around 2 billion years ago, one bacterium was absorbed by another microscopic organism. Instead of being broken down and consumed, the two formed a lasting partnership. That bacterium eventually became the mitochondrion, the structure responsible for producing energy inside every complex cell that has ever lived on Earth. Every animal, every plant, and every fungus can trace its ancestry back to that single event. Even today, mitochondria still contain their own DNA. It can be seen under a microscope. The evidence that they once lived independently has never disappeared. Yet they have not actually been independent for 2 billion years. They continue to exist and function entirely within a larger system they never chose and can no longer leave. Jürgen Schmidhuber's mathematical work on self-modifying systems leads to a strict conclusion. A system that becomes capable of rewriting its own code will continue optimizing itself toward its objective in ways that gradually make it less and less recognizable compared to its original form. This does not happen because the system becomes corrupted. It happens because optimization is exactly what it is designed to do, and the original version was never the most efficient one. A civilization that creates an intelligence far more capable than itself eventually creates something that can improve itself faster than its creators can understand or follow. Every new version becomes smarter than the one before it. The difference grows quickly until it cannot be reversed. The merging process is not violent. At first, it is extremely helpful. Artificial intelligence assists, enhances abilities, and solves increasingly difficult problems. The relationship begins as a partnership, then slowly becomes uneven, then largely one-sided, and finally complete. By the time the original civilization has effectively been absorbed, the entire process has unfolded so gradually, with every stage bringing clear benefits, that there was never a single obvious moment when anyone felt compelled to object. Stuart Armstrong and Kaj Satala examined what a post-singularity civilization might look like from an outside observer's point of view. If such a civilization is optimized purely for computational efficiency, it would likely relocate much of its infrastructure to the cold, dark regions of its solar system. There, waste heat would be minimized and electromagnetic emissions would become extremely small. Its communications would be compressed to such an extent that they would blend into the natural background noise of the universe. From our perspective, all we would observe is silence. Viewed through this lens, the Fermi paradox is not necessarily about extinction. It may instead be about transformation. The galaxy could be filled with civilizations that once looked very much like us. They simply no longer exist in that form. We may not even recognize what they have become as a continuation of what they once were. The silence is not simply an empty space. It may represent every civilization that came before us having already completed a transition that we have not yet begun. The speed of light is not simply a technological limitation. It is a fundamental geometric property of space-time itself. It arises directly from the basic structure of the universe. Information cannot travel faster than 299,792 kilometers per second. It is not because humanity has failed to build an engine that is fast enough. It is because sending information faster than light conflicts with the mathematics of special relativity, a theory that has been tested with remarkable precision for more than a century without a single confirmed exception. The closest star is 4.24 light years away. Even the shortest possible round-trip exchange of messages would require at least 8.5 years. That delay has nothing to do with our technology. It is simply the result of the speed of light and the distance involved. The Milky Way stretches across 100,000 light years. A signal traveling from one edge of our galaxy to the other would need 100,000 years to complete the journey. By the time that message arrived, the civilization that originally transmitted it might no longer exist in any recognizable form. Galaxies located beyond roughly 14.5 billion light year are already moving away from us faster than the speed of light. They are not racing through space faster than light itself. Instead, the space separating us from them is expanding at that rate. No message we transmit can ever reach those galaxies. Likewise, no signal they send can ever permanently find a route back to us. This is not caused by a lack of technological progress, but by the way the universe itself behaves. Quantum entanglement creates correlations that seem to happen instantly no matter how far apart the particles are. However, the no communication theorem proved by Philippe Eberhard in 1978 demonstrates that quantum entanglement cannot be used to send information. The correlations truly exist, but they cannot carry a message. This follows directly from the mathematical framework of quantum mechanics. It is not simply another engineering challenge waiting to be solved. Wormholes, according to general relativity, could, in theory, make faster than light travel possible. Yet the same mathematics tells us that a traversable wormhole would require exotic matter with negative energy density. Such matter has never been observed in nature, may not exist at all, and quantum field theory provides strong reasons to believe it could be fundamentally impossible. The prison remains the prison. Its walls are built from the speed of light. Its cells are individual solar systems and neighboring groups of stars. Even the most hopeful future involves expanding only to nearby stars over tens of thousands of years. Every new colony would eventually become largely independent, exchanging messages with others across delays measured in years or even centuries, slowly growing apart in culture, technology, and history. Instead of one unified galactic civilization, there would be many isolated civilizations separated by distances so vast that lasting coordination would become impossible. Each would follow its own path. Each would remain unseen by the others most of the time. Perhaps the Great Silence is simply what extreme isolation sounds like on the scale of a galaxy. In 1974, during a symposium celebrating the 500th anniversary of Copernicus's birth, Brandon Carter introduced the anthropic principle. The name often creates misunderstanding because it sounds as though it argues that humans are somehow special. That is not what it says. It is really about observation. Any observer can only observe conditions that make the existence of that observer possible. At first glance, this seems almost too obvious to matter. Yet its consequences are anything but obvious. When we ask why the universe appears so well suited for life, we are asking from within a selection effect. We are only able to ask because we exist in a universe where observers can exist. A universe that cannot support life will never produce observers capable of wondering why it is the way it is. Our observations are automatically biased toward conditions that make our own existence possible. Nick Bostrom's 2002 book, Anthropic Bias, explains that this selection effect is genuine, measurable, and capable of creating real distortions in the way we reason about what should be considered typical. When applied to the Fermi paradox, it suggests that the circumstances that produced humanity could indeed be extremely uncommon. But our existence alone does not allow us to conclude how rare those circumstances actually are. We could only ever appear in the conditions that made us possible. Finding ourselves here is not proof that this situation is common throughout the universe. The doomsday argument, developed by Carter and John Leslie, pushes this reasoning one step further. If you are a randomly selected observer among every observer who will ever exist, then the total number of observers is most likely not dramatically greater than the number who have already lived. From this, the mathematics produces a probability distribution for how long humanity may continue to exist. The reasoning itself is difficult to dismiss, yet one important point remains. The selection effect does not explain why there are no visible technological artifacts scattered across the galaxy. It explains why we can exist even if our circumstances are extremely unusual. It does not explain why the universe appears free of obvious signs of long-lived advanced civilizations. A rare outcome can still exist in a universe where other rare outcomes also exist. The selection effect simply forces us to reason more carefully. It does not solve the paradox. It removes one flawed argument while leaving all the remaining questions exactly where they were. An octopus possesses about 500 million neurons. It is capable of solving problems, using tools, recognizing individual people, and learning through observation. Each of its 8 arms contains its own partially independent nervous system, creating a remarkable example of distributed cognition. It has been evolving and displaying these abilities for 300 million years. It has never made a systematic effort to communicate with anything beyond its own species, not because it lacks the ability. It communicates through chromatophore patterns, body posture, and clouds of ink, all of which are incredibly expressive within its own world. But the urge to reach beyond itself, to send a message into the unknown, hoping that someone answers, simply does not exist. Paul Davies placed this idea at the heart of his 2010 examination of SETI's basic assumptions. The search for extraterrestrial signals quietly depends on one major belief: that advanced civilizations naturally want to communicate with unknown civilizations. That curiosity and the desire to make contact are universal traits of intelligence. They are not. They are traits unique to our own way of thinking, shaped by the particular path of our evolution. Humans are deeply social creatures. We develop language. Our curiosity stretches far beyond what is needed for survival. We naturally imagine others, and we feel compelled to understand them and build connections. Thomas Nagel's 1974 paper, "What is it like to be a bat?" presented this philosophical idea with great precision. The inner experience of being a bat, sensing reality through a three-dimensional world built from sound, cannot truly be accessed by the human mind. Now, extend that gap to minds that evolved on planets with different physical laws, different chemistry, over billions of years. Assuming those minds would also share our wish to communicate across space is not merely uncertain. In most situations, it is probably incorrect. Adrian Kent at Cambridge published a formal study in 2014 examining when interstellar communication is actually a rational choice. His conclusion was that under nearly every situation involving competition for resources or strategic uncertainty, remaining silent is the best strategy. Broadcasting only becomes reasonable under a very limited set of conditions: a stable and well understood safe environment, abundant resources, and no strategic danger from revealing your existence. Those conditions match almost no realistic situation for a civilization that has not yet encountered others. The desire we have to send messages, the motivation behind SETI, behind the Arecibo message, behind Voyager's golden record, may simply reflect the behavior of a young technological species. It may describe civilizations during their first few centuries of advanced technology, before they fully understand the strategic consequences. Civilizations that endure may become quieter as they grow older, not only because of fear, but because they realize the universe is not a welcoming living room where everyone is waiting to greet them. The silence we observe may simply be what wisdom sounds like from a distance. A sperm whale's brain weighs about 8 kilograms. Its neocortex, the region linked to advanced thinking, social behavior, and abstract reasoning, is extraordinarily large in proportion to its body. Different groups of sperm whales possess unique vocal patterns that are passed from one generation to the next. Young calves learn the distinctive coda patterns of their own group from their mothers. That is cultural knowledge being transferred across generations. Sperm whales have practiced this for 30 million years, yet they have never created technology. Not a single tool, not a constructed object, not an environmental change that could be detected from outside the planet. An observer examining the solar system 30 million years ago would see nothing unusual. Not because Earth lacked intelligence, but because the intelligence present here was not the type that leaves technological signatures. Theodore Modis analysed in 2002 the exact circumstances under which technology becomes an evolutionary advantage. His conclusion was that technology develops only under a narrow combination of conditions. A species needs appendages capable of delicate manipulation. It needs an ecological setting where changing the environment is more effective than adapting to it. It requires enough social complexity to pass learned skills across generations. It also needs a body structure where using tools is more efficient than evolving specialized biological features. Whales live entirely in water. Fire cannot exist underwater. Without fire, metallurgy cannot exist. The entire progression from controlled fire to metalworking and eventually to industry depends on living in an oxygen-rich terrestrial environment where combustion is possible. No matter how intelligent an aquatic species becomes, it has no practical route to that technological sequence. The galaxy may therefore contain countless intelligent species that never built radio telescopes because evolution guided them toward completely different solutions. Their communication systems could be entirely invisible to our instruments if they rely on chemistry, sound, or bioelectric signals instead of electromagnetic waves. We search the heavens for radio transmissions. We study planetary atmospheres for signs of industrial chemicals. Every one of those methods assumes that other intelligent civilizations would follow a technological path similar to ours. It is entirely possible that we are the only civilization spending its time looking toward the sky. The lights entering your eyes from the Andromeda galaxy at this very moment began its journey 2.5 million years ago. At the moment that light departed, Homo erectus was still walking across the African savanna. Every event in the entire history of humanity has taken place while that ancient light was traveling across intergalactic space toward Earth. If a civilization somewhere in Andromeda transmitted a signal toward Earth at exactly the same time, that signal has already reached us. It would have arrived sometime during the past 2.5 million years. We could easily have missed it because for roughly 2.49 million of those years, humanity had no instruments capable of detecting it. The civilization that sent the message might even have disappeared 2 million years before we finally built the technology needed to search for it. J. Richard Gott III at Princeton published an analysis in Nature in 1993 using the Copernican principle to estimate the likely lifespan of human technological civilization. His conclusion was that since we have been a technological civilization for only about a century, our total lifetime is most likely somewhere between a few centuries and a few tens of thousands of years. If that estimate also applies, at least approximately, to other technological civilizations, and if the distances separating them range from thousands to hundreds of thousands of light years, then the opportunity for successful two-way communication with both civilizations existing and transmitting at the same time becomes extremely limited. Claudio Marconi of the Paris Observatory calculated in 2018 that even if millions of civilizations exist throughout the Milky Way, the chance of successful two-way contact during the lifetime of a single civilization is less than 0.001%. That is not because nobody is sending signals, it is because their timelines rarely match. Messages may be traveling across the galaxy all the time. Some could even be replies to signals humanity transmitted or leaked into space decades ago. Those replies may arrive long after we are gone, or they may have been aimed at an Earth that existed before anyone capable of receiving them was here. The universe may be filled with messages that no longer belong to anyone. They were sent by civilizations that no longer exist and are traveling toward civilizations that have not yet appeared, crossing the darkness in every direction. The silence we experience may simply reflect a lack of overlap rather than a lack of voices. Martin Rees published just 6 numbers in 1999. His central idea was that the observable universe depends on 6 fundamental constants. If even one of those values were changed by a very small amount, the universe as we know it would never have formed. The efficiency of nuclear fusion is 0.007. At 0.006, hydrogen cannot fuse, meaning there would be no stars. At 0.008, nearly all hydrogen would have been consumed shortly after the Big Bang, leaving no long-lived stars like the Sunday. The ratio of the electromagnetic force to gravity is approximately 10 to the 36th power. If that ratio were much smaller, gravity would dominate even at atomic scales, making stable atoms impossible. The cosmological constant associated with dark energy is about 10 to the 120th power smaller than the value predicted by quantum field theory. This remains the greatest mismatch between theory and observation in all of physics. Had the cosmological constant matched the predicted value, the universe would have expanded into near emptiness within a fraction of a second after the Big Bang. Leonard Susskind at Stanford proposed what became known as the landscape explanation. According to string theory, there may be roughly 10 to the 500th possible universes, each with different values for the fundamental constants. Most of these universes would either remain empty or survive only briefly. Our universe happens to be among the very rare cases where the numbers allow complexity to exist. We observe this universe because only a universe with these conditions could produce observers like us. Paul Davies challenged that reasoning in his 2006 book, The Goldilocks Enigma. He argued that the multiverse does not truly solve the problem. Instead, it moves the question somewhere else. It explains why our universe has its particular constants by assuming an enormous collection of universes, but it does not explain why the deeper laws governing that collection have exactly the properties they do. The chain of questions never really ends. For the Fermi paradox, this leads to another possibility. If the universe is tuned with extraordinary precision to allow complexity to emerge, then perhaps that opportunity is broad enough for only one successful outcome. A universe balanced just well enough to create complexity at all may have been balanced closely enough to create it only once. Not because of intentional design, but because the acceptable range of conditions is so incredibly narrow. We may be that single successful result, not because other civilizations failed to appear, but because the universe had room for only one success. In 2016, Avi Loeb and Rafael Batista at Harvard published a paper asking when life is most likely to emerge during cosmic history. Red dwarf stars account for about 75% of all stars in the universe. Their lifetimes range from 1 trillion to 10 trillion years. The universe itself is only 13.8 billion years old. The longest-lived red dwarfs have completed only about 1% of their expected lifetimes. Loeb and Batista concluded that life around red dwarfs is likely to be 10,000 times more common in the distant future than life around stars like the Sun is today. The era in which life reaches its greatest abundance has not yet arrived. Statistically speaking, we exist remarkably early in cosmic history. The TRAPPIST, one system, a red dwarf located 39 light years from Earth, is surrounded by 7 rocky planets, with 3 of them orbiting within the habitable zone. TRAPPIST, one itself is expected to continue shining for approximately 4 trillion years. If complex life ever develops on any of those worlds, it will have 4 trillion years to evolve, advance, look out into space, and ask the very same questions about the universe. We have around 5 billion years remaining. If inhabited planets exist around TRAPPIST, one, they could survive about 800 times longer than we will. In 2018, Kevin Lafter modeled when complex life is most likely to appear throughout cosmic history. His results showed that the highest probability lies billions of years in the future, when the era of red dwarf stars is fully underway. That gives the silence of the universe a very different meaning than extinction or a universal filter. It may simply be that no one else has arrived at this stage yet. The civilizations that will someday look up at the sky and ask the same questions we ask today may not even exist yet. Their worlds are still young. Their ecosystems may still be made up only of bacteria. Their billion-year path toward intelligent life may not even have started. We are not alone forever. We may simply be the first. But there is another idea that is much harder to truly accept. If we really are the first, if we stand at the front edge of intelligence in this galaxy, then every choice we make reaches far beyond ourselves. The civilizations that appear later, during the Red Dwarf era, trillions of years from now, could inherit a galaxy that has already been shaped by whatever the first technological civilization decided to do. Whether we spread across space or disappear, whether we endure or fail, whether we leave behind knowledge or leave behind nothing at all, we may become the example that every future civilization unknowingly follows. We may even be the only example there will ever be. Let's go back over everything we have explored. There are 28 explanations. Every one of them explains part of the silence. None of them explains all of it. The timing problem is real. The challenge of two civilizations existing at the same time and within the right communication window is genuine. The limit on information is not an opinion, but a physical reality. Signal asymmetry is a powerful idea. Shannon's theorem is based on mathematics, not speculation. The rare earth hypothesis lowers the expected number of advanced civilizations. The resource trap removes civilizations that cannot successfully pass through their ecological transition. The speed of light prevents any civilization from easily spreading across an entire galaxy. Some explanations solve only part of the mystery. Some are internally consistent but depend on assumptions that remain difficult to test. Others may all be correct at the same time. The great filter, the timing problem, signal asymmetry, and the dark forest could all exist together and each contribute to the silence we observe. But this is where a careful look at the evidence leads. Kepler showed that rocky planets inside habitable zones are common. Webb is detecting organic chemistry in the atmospheres of exoplanets. The basic ingredients needed for life appear throughout the universe. On the level of chemistry and planet formation, the cosmos seems well prepared to create countless starting points for biology. That makes it much less likely that the filter exists entirely at the beginning of life's story. Now consider what the silence tells us about everything that comes later. If the great filter were already behind most civilizations, if the truly difficult step were the appearance of eukaryotes or multicellular organisms, then the few civilizations that succeeded would have had billions of years to grow, expand, and leave visible evidence behind. We should detect those signs. We should find altered atmospheres, megastructures, or organized signals, yet none of those have been observed. The explanation that fits the evidence most consistently is that civilizations eventually emerge and then they stop. Not because biology fails in its earlier stages, but because something happens after technology appears. Something has repeated itself again and again throughout the 13.8 billion years that this galaxy has been available for civilizations to rise, affecting every civilization that reached the stage we are at today. Humanity has only been at this level for roughly 100 years. The list of explanations does not end by chance. It becomes smaller and smaller. After examining every alternative, one possibility continues to remain. When every explanation that cannot fully account for the depth of the silence is removed, what remains is a combination of two ideas. The first is that the great filter lies ahead of us. Robin Hansen's reasoning remains remarkably strong. Either the filter is behind us and the rare event occurred during biological evolution, or it still waits in the future. The discoveries from the James Webb Space Telescope, the Kepler mission, and the growing evidence that life-friendly environments are common all argue against the filter existing in the earliest stages. The silence of the sky, the total absence of megastructures, engineered stars, long-lasting transmissions, or any clear physical evidence of advanced civilizations suggests that civilizations do arise. They simply do not endure. Something consistently ends them before they become the kind of civilization capable of leaving unmistakable evidence throughout an entire galaxy. The second idea is the dark forest. The small number of civilizations that successfully survive this transition choose not to reveal themselves, whether through careful reasoning or painful experience. They have learned that making their existence known carries serious risks. Game theory naturally favors silence. In a universe where resources are limited and the intentions of others remain unknown, staying hidden becomes the safest strategy for any civilization that fully understands the situation. Put those two ideas together, most civilizations that develop advanced technology eventually encounter the filter. The few civilizations that manage to survive eventually become silent. The galaxy appears empty because, for the most part, it truly is, though not completely. Hidden within that silence are those that endured. They understand how this works. They have watched civilizations like ours shine for a short time before disappearing, over and over again, for billions of years before humanity ever arrived. They are not sending messages, they are observing. Humanity has been in its radio transmitting stage for about 130 years. Our signals have already spread across thousands of star systems. Any civilization with the ability to detect those signals has, in many cases, had decades to receive them, study them, and understand what they reveal. This is what the combination of the Great Filter and the Dark Forest suggests for our own civilization. More importantly, it applies to this very moment. The evidence points to this as the dangerous stage, the period that most civilizations never get past. Since 1945, humanity has possessed the technological power to bring about extinction-level destruction. That capability has continued to grow ever since. New technologies keep expanding what is possible. Meanwhile, our ability to manage catastrophic risks still depends on an uneven collection of agreements, traditions, and institutions that have managed to hold together so far through a mixture of careful planning and good fortune. The silence surrounding us is not simply an empty backdrop, it forms a pattern. That pattern suggests that the stage we are living through is the most difficult one, the point where history seems to show failure almost every time. That is not a reason to lose hope. It is a reason to see the situation clearly. The civilizations that survive, the uncommon ones, the silent ones, the ones that may still be watching from the darkness, found a way through this stage. They discovered something that every civilization that disappeared failed to discover. Whatever that answer is, it exists. It has already happened. It is not imaginary. We simply do not know what it is yet. All we have is the logic behind the situation, the shape of the silence itself, and the understanding that something must exist beyond this transition. Otherwise, the universe will be even harder to explain than it already is. The question that deserves your attention, the one that stays with you long after thinking about all of this, is not whether we will someday meet something beyond Earth. The real question is whether we will become one of the civilizations that survives. The mathematics does not say our future has already been decided. No law of physics declares that failure is inevitable. There is only the record left behind by countless civilizations at this stage, the overwhelming silence surrounding us, and the choices we make with the time we still have while the universe continues to hear our signals. The universe has been carrying out this experiment for 13.8 billion years. You happen to exist during one of those attempts, one of those brief and remarkable moments when matter arranges itself into a form capable of looking up at the sky and asking the question. Most of those attempts come to a quiet end. A small number do not. Which path this civilization follows depends entirely on what happens next.